Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This week we look at a creepy crawly Tyranid Deathleaper, one of the brand new models from the new Tyranid range. Let's get stuck in. So once again, I have been enlisted by Winters to make one of the new models from a new range. So I'm going to be looking at this Tyranid Deathleaper because I said if I was going to do it, it's got to be a cool one, and he said this was a cool one. So starting, as always, from the start, we're going to unbox it and have a look at everything. I'll be honest, other than the pipes, I have no idea what I'm looking at because I'm not a Tyranid player. Everything seems to just be a mess of Carapace and goobly things. I have no idea. And as someone who likes to build tanks and space marines and stuff, this was a real pain to put together. I cannot comment on the rest of the Tyranid range, maybe they're all like this, but for anyone who's new to the hobby, just be patient, take your time. This is going to take you lots of time. It took me, a fairly experienced hobbyist, about 40 minutes to put together this one guy. The detail, as on every recent Games Workshop model, is absolutely amazing, and once you're complete you will have an absolutely awesome looking model. But putting together all these little individual claws and trying to understand how these organic parts fit together was rather time consuming and infuriating. But the end result, absolutely worth it. Said absolutely 3 times there, that's a 4th. Gonna try not to say it again this video. Keep count. His flesh cape, don't like the name I've chosen for that, but that is what it is a bit of a pain to put together, but is a really cool and interesting design choice from both how it fits into the model and also how they've designed it to go together. So whilst a pain, you might enjoy this part. I think it's very interesting to see how far Games Workshop have come in recent years for their model design, because I can't imagine this existing a while ago. Plus, he looks like one of those things from Doctor Who, you know, the Ood with the tentacle faces. I never watched much Doctor Who, but I know the real ones will understand. Also, another word to the wise, make sure you super glue him to his base rather than plastic glue if you're going to paint him on his base. The contact points are really small, so just bite the bullet and go with super glue. Or keep them separate. There he is, all built up, and we have a very cool model ready for painting. We're going to be painting this in High Fleet Kraken scheme, following Winter's basing tips and tutorials because it's for him. To prime, I used Wraithbone all over from the rattle can. I originally wanted to use Zundry Dust, which is also another cool effect, but I ran out. So what we're going to do instead is use Skeleton Horde contrast paint all over this Wraithbone to give it a nice dark, basically sepia appearance. Seraphim sepia unfortunately is a bit too thin for this job. I was excited to do all the skin, I'm going to call it skin, I don't really know what it is, because you can do loads of cool fun colours in all the recesses. So as soon as my Skeleton Horde was dry all over the main areas, I decided to go in with a Carroburg Crimson as my next step. Focus this colour towards where the Carapace meets the other part of its body. I'm going to call it an exoskeleton as opposed to an endo because it's definitely on the outside here. But this gives it quite a raw effect and gives a nice transition between the reds that we're going to be using shortly. I also made sure to focus this in all the joints where there's weird bits of stretchy skin, and also around some of the claws on those giant mandibles he's got over his head. Areas that I was also particularly excited about painting were the flesh cloak, again, still don't like that, and the wibbly wobbly tentacles he's got round his mouth. These absolutely, I think, need to be this colour because they're just gross, and it gives us an opportunity to go even further shortly afterwards. I'm using the shade paint here, a bit more like a contrast paint, using it to cover up all that bright primer. If you have Vulpus Pink, I think that works too from a contrast side. The next step and final step for painting all this skin at this point in time is to use pale sand and dry brush all over the areas we've painted, including the pink parts. The next enjoyable and easy step is to use Druchii Violet, a nice purple wash, and go into those areas that are closer to the carapace and the skin. This is all over the tentacles, the flesh cloak, and the joints. My advice here would be to stay cautious initially and use some thin coats. You can always build it up, but it's much harder to then tone it back. I'm focusing around all the areas on the flesh cloak, basically doing a very thin glaze over everything there because I wanted it to be a little bit darker to show that it's slightly different to all those joints and other areas we've already worked on. I also allowed it to pool a bit more between the tentacly bits on the back between the membranes. I have no idea what any of these words really are and whether they're correct, but they seem gross, so probably Tyranidy. Now onto the actual Carapace, we're going to use Khorne red as our base layer all over. This is a really nice, dark, saturated red, and it will contrast against everything we've done really well. Once we've completed base coating all our red, I'm going to go in with some very thin Black Legion and create a recess shade, or a panel line if you like, between all the areas on the Carapace. This is going to add a bit more contrast when we come on to do our next step, which is to do all our highlights. Our first highlight is Evil Sunz Scarlet. We're going to be using this to create a nice striation effect all over these areas, essentially doing lots of little straight lines pushing down towards the bottom of each Carapace panel, if you like. This makes the surface look a little bit more uneven and ridged, which seems perfect for these guys. This is only step one of our highlights though. The next step is going to be going in with Wild Rider Red, which is more orangey, and doing the exact same thing over a smaller area. This is going to be our final highlight, and with this the model is pretty close to being complete. The next steps are all downhill from here. At this point, with the main Tyranid done, we're going to switch back to Black Legion to cover off all the claws and talons and all those big scary things that will rip you apart if you get too close. We're also going to keep it to one side once we're done because we're going to need it for the basing steps. Once all the black is down, we're going to use Dawnstone for a quick edge highlight over all of the talons. The eyes are a quick job, just some Avalanche Sunset or any yellow you like in there to give it a nice predatory look. Once that's complete, as mentioned, we're going to use Black Legion all over the base to prep it for our next couple of steps. We're also going to use Basilicanum Grey, which is a grey contrast paint, over the areas that look like rubble and stone. All of the little Tyranidy parts over this base were done in the exact same way as the rest of the body, and I used a metallic silver to do all the metallic parts, which is all the banding around the pipes and basically anything you want. Now Winter's bases all of his Tyranids with one of the Citadel pastes. I think it's Armageddon Dust or some such. I don't have that, so I'm using Vallejo Thick Mud. Whilst that's still drying, I'm going to add a few rocks for a bit of an extra effect and just to break up the base a bit more. Plus it also ties it in with Winter's army a little bit better, as he has rocks everywhere. Once those are down and everything's dry, I'm going to use Seraphim Sepia to tie everything together on the base, but not going over those parts that I base coated in black, just the areas that I've added with the mud and the rocks. Then I'm going to go over with a dry brush of pale sand over basically everything down there, just to make sure it's all tied together and looks dusty. After cleaning up the base rim with some Black Legion and making sure everything looked neat and tidy, I took it outside to spray varnish. But I wasn't quite done. I wanted to use a gloss varnish, in this case Ardcoat, all over the wibbly tentacle parts, a few of the armor joints here and there, and also all over that massive, disgusting flesh cloak. And with that, I'm pretty sure that's my first Tyranid model I've ever done complete. Well, not including a few dead ones on bases or whatever, but first proper one that's meant to be alive and killing other stuff. Please let me know what you guys think of the model and how you found the building process. As always, I've been Sam. See you next time.